Hello, everybody. I'm Paul Ryden, and today on Global Book Network, we're taking a journey to a distant part of the world that we're all familiar with from the headlines, but in reality, know very little about. Our guide through this journey of discovery is Shaheryar Mian, who has written Shells on the Sand, a story that chronicles a family's escape from Kuwait during the First Gulf War. You don't have to imagine what it would be like to travel 3,000 miles through a perilous region. Mr. Mian has done that for us. Welcome, Shahriyar, and thanks for joining us from Canada.
Thank you, Paul, for having me.
Now, the story, Shells on the Sand, is based on true events, but you've fictionalized it for a dramatic effect, kind of like historical fiction, I guess. How did the story come to you?
Well, so I have a couple of friends who went through this similar journey, very close friends I went to school with. And years later, there was a family gathering, and a friend of my father was there, and we started chatting. And he told me about his journey through that region during the time of the First Gulf War. And I always found that there was a lot of these stories I heard over the years of that time, and a lot of those stories were untold because this was a time with the absence of social media and smartphones, and I really felt that they needed to be told because it's hardly you ever hear people traveling 3,000 miles in a car to get to their destination, and in this particular instance, it was seven countries, rich with history and a lot of turmoil.
Yeah, to put it into context, the journey this family took was like driving from Boston to San Francisco, but the land they go through, as you mentioned, is nothing like North America, nor is the history. What's the biggest misunderstanding people have about that region of the world, especially in 1990, the time you write about?
Yeah, I think the problem is that a lot of people look at current affairs and they go back 10, 20, 50, maybe 100 years. But this region is rich in history. I mean, we're talking, you could go back 1,000 years and you learn so many things, 500 years, 2,000 years. Um, I think the big thing is some of the regions that I covered, Baghdad, take that as an example, is a greatly misunderstood city. You think of Baghdad and you think turmoil, despair, chaos. But this was one of the most important cities in the 12th century. That's where algebra was introduced. This is where there was the House of Wisdom, where the great translation movement happened in Arabia, where a lot of the Greek scripture was translated um, by Syriac Christian scholars, actually.
Mhm.
And that ultimately led to the European Renaissance. Baghdad is where a cure for cataracts came about. A lot of the discoveries in astronomy came about there as well. And the caliph there at the time was a very progressive person who used to hold conclaves, open debate. And a lot of these discoveries didn't happen solely by Muslim scholars. There was Jewish scholars and Christian scholars that contributed to that progress. And all that happened in Baghdad. And then it got destroyed by the Mongols in, I believe, the year 1258, if I can recall correctly. So, very sad, tragic history, but you ought to learn about it because that's when you gain perspective and how much this city meant not just to Arabia but the rest of the world.
Well, if you're talking about a family that's traveling this area and through those historical regions in 1990, how did you incorporate that into a modern day, relatively modern day story?
Yeah, so this family's journey was through these seven countries. Baghdad was one of the first cities that they went through. So I told about their struggle. Like they were in this car, they went through the border, what they were experiencing. But when they were in Baghdad, they stayed there. And the mother, Lubna, one of the main characters, took her children out into the streets. She took them to a museum, and it was then when I added a little bit of context of what
Uh,
they were seeing and the historical context, and also the family carried a manuscript written by an author, and both Daniel and Lubna, the main characters, read through that manuscript. So a lot of the history I tell in italics. So when they're in Iraq, the manuscript covers the history of Baghdad, and they read it, and then if you're reading the book, you'll see that.
what did you enjoy most about writing the book?
So the first 20,000 pages was relatively easy because you have all these crazy ideas, they come to your mind, you start writing, and then I hit a block.
Yeah.
And it was getting around that block was the introduction of temporary characters, which is something I learned. What I mean by that is, people you introduce into the story uh, as fillers, and they add some, depth to the story and take them in and out. And that was pretty interesting because you can pretty much give them any life you want, and if it goes wrong, it doesn't really matter because they're not your main character.
Mhm.
And that was a great piece of learning. I enjoyed that.
Did you find that sometimes, and I've noticed this in the few times I write fiction, that sometimes the story starts to write itself?
Yeah, yeah, it does. I think with this one was what helped was the fact that it was a journey and there was 7 countries, so I knew the geography.
Right.
So it became relatively easy. Okay, now on to the next destination and on to the next. And I was able to split the story in two because the family was supposed to travel with an entourage, and due to a mishap, they were separated. So it ended up being sort of two storylines, and they converged at a later point.
Hmm. Well, um, was there ever any point while you were writing the book that you thought to yourself, gosh, I hope other people are as interested in this as I am? And what did you do to make sure they were?
Yeah, I did. It's interesting. I didn't want to write a history book. I'm very interested in history.
Yeah.
From a very early age, whenever I read history, especially Middle Eastern history, it resonated, and my attention span would be a lot greater when I was reading or in museums or historical sites. And I'm not your typical historical fiction author. I mean, I got my MBA, I have a CFA charter holder, and you would imagine I'd write a book, How to Make Your First $1 Million. But instead, I chose historical fiction. Um, you know, this is the reason why I wrote this fictional story because I believe it's a story of adventure. Okay, and people are interested in adventure. They're interested in people's struggle and triumph. But at the same time, I try to incorporate snippets of different parts of history, and I weave that into the story to instill people's interest in the region and a lot of things that happen there. For instance, as I mentioned about Baghdad, I hope that when people read that, they'll see it differently and think, wow, I didn't know so much happened in this city. So much of what we're experiencing today is a result of the progress that was made in that city. When the family goes through Turkey, I talked about Mehmet II's conquest of Constantinople, which is current day Istanbul, and which was the seat of Christendom for 1500 years. How that happened and the impact of that we experience to this day. And then the story of Saladin and Richard the Lionheart in the Third Crusade, another turning point in history. So a lot of these very important characters and very important things that happen in our history, I try to weave that into the story. If I wrote a historical book, I'd be over thousands of pages, maybe
Yeah.
multiple volumes.
Yeah.
It would bore you. So yeah.
Well, I know you're a bit of a history buff yourself, but certainly you didn't know all this stuff already off the top of your head. Oh, I'll just write about this. You must have learned a lot as you were writing.
Yes, a lot of it actually I learned through an early age. When I in 2005, when I was just graduated from McGill with my bachelor degree, I did a trip in south of Spain, and I was at the Alhambra Palace. So I learned about the Moorish history. So I learned a lot of the history through my travel. I wrote a journal. I had to write things down through books, uh, watching documentaries. Um, and then I decided when my memory started to dwindle as I was aging, it's time to write before I forget. But yes, I did learn a lot. I had to do a lot more research on the characters because you want to condense the part of history and you want to point out the most important things of the story. So that was also challenging, obviously, because you're covering such a lot of ground in a short amount of pages.
Well, now you are a man of many interests. You're an entrepreneur. You've worked in financial services, lived in London, been in Canada since the age of 16. You've dabbled in politics, and you write a blog called Cloud 10. Tell us a little bit about the blog. I bet it's different than the book.
It is different. Yeah. So, when I did my MBA at Oxford, and one of the things at Oxford was they encourage you to read a lot and write. And I got invited to write for the MBA blog, and I wrote an entry, and it was very inspiring. When I was writing about my experience, and I felt it kind of tapped into my imagination. It was meditative, it was relaxing, and so first half of my course, I decided to take a trip in Asia, and I did this retreat in Bali. And frankly, I was quite bored, and so I said, okay, why don't I? I was reading a lot, and said, why don't I start my own blog about my trip and what I'm experiencing? And that's how it started. And then I feel I believe it's very important to have conviction and to believe in your point of view and being able to express that, even if it's unpopular. And I decided that's what I'll try and do in my blog. And I don't care about topic, whatever it is that I'm experiencing, or I have an opinion about something or learned something, I'll share that. So every quarter I write about something. I'm not as active as I would like to be. I don't earn any money from it, but it's really a passion project. And yeah, I've been doing it for quite some time now. So
Have you ever thought about writing a book based on what you're putting in your blog? I mean, you could take parts of the blog and make it an anthology of some sort.
yeah, I mean, I have not, but I am actually thinking of a sequel already about a a science fiction, actually also based on a little bit of history, continuing on from this story. So I think that will be my next project, and I'm a lot in much better stead in terms of writing the next novel because you know all the challenges that you're going to face and things of that sort.
Well, I think sometimes you might think that knowing all the challenges that are ahead, if you didn't know all those challenges that were ahead, you'd go ahead and write it. If you did know about all those challenges, you wouldn't. But you're saying that you know all the challenges, so now you know how to get around them.
I'm sure there'll be new challenges too, but I think the main ones, right, when you kind of run out of, you feel the story is not taking itself anywhere, or the characters getting boring, and what to do, how to sort of add twists and things like that. The way I write as well, sometimes I'll write like I'll get to the first half of the book and start writing like later chapters, and then come back because I know that I want certain event or certain things to happen, and then bringing it back. So I know everybody has a different style, but as I was writing, I learned that you got to have a routine, and even if you write every day for 10 minutes, I think it's better than just leaving it and then coming back to it because then you lose your tempo.
Yeah, I
So
write a little bit every day myself, and generally I don't try to write something out of whole cloth. What I'll just do is go, okay, what did I do yesterday? And write about it. And sometimes it's something you learned, or sometimes it's just, I went to the store, I did this and that, but it keeps you in the habit of writing. And eventually it develops into other things.
yeah.
The most important thing I learned from your blog, though, is that you don't like cappuccino in cups the size of cereal bowls. I'm with you on that. You have a list of your pet peeves on there, and I think I'm with you on a lot of them. You also think that few people will read your blog, but maybe after this interview, they will.
Yeah, and I hope they like what they read. I don't believe in agreeability, so I like a debate. I like a good debate, and I hope to keep writing on the blog. Um, it's really about being disciplined, and I'm thinking of the next topic I'm going to write. Actually, it's going to be a political piece on American politics.
Really?
So I look forward to that. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And what makes you qualified to write about American politics?
I lived in the U.S.
Mhm.
I study what's going on over there, and the kind of topic I can tell you the topic. I'm going to call it the enabler, and I'm going to talk about the rise of Trump because of Barack Obama,
Uh-huh.
and he was the enabler. So
Oh,
there you go.
very interesting. Very interesting. Now, when you're talking about the sequel to the first book, um, you're not talking about the same family going through this science fiction adventure?
Well, actually, so Daniel, he's an engineer, and the sequel is really about. It's going to be in south of Spain at the Alhambra Palace, and because of his engineering background, he's going to fit a role in that book in excavation of a historical astrolabe. So that's where I'm going to bring him in. That's the
All right.
plan.
All right. Well, let's get people on reading your blog. But first of all, let's make sure they get a copy of your novel and read Shells on the Sand. It's available on Amazon and well worth reading. And folks, you might even learn something historical. Shaheryar, thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure talking with you. And
Thank you
thank you.
so much, Paul, for having me.
You bet. And thank you, folks, for spending a few minutes with us on Global Book Network. I'm Paul Ryden. We'll see you next time.